divers who've been working on this project. It was really incredible that on the very first dive we did, we found some kind of historic wreck. The more stuff we brought up a few interesting artifacts, some lead shot, a brass belt buckle. You know, we kind of had an idea that it was a historic wreck, but we really, we're looking for something that would just pinpoint the date for us. And I was actually on the second dive of the day, and I was leading that team. And we were down there searching around, and you have to understand it's as black as midnight. I mean, there's no visibility at all. It's just so silty. And you feel around the bottom with your hands, and that's, you can't see a thing. I put my hand on it. I knew, it was something big, and I put my hand right on the dolphin. As soon as I put my hand on that, the first thing I thought was, oh man, this is something. And I put my hand on, when I felt the second dolphin, I knew that, it had to be a cannon. I reached my hand around, slided around the base of the breech end, and felt the cascabel, which is the large knob on that end, and there was no doubt in my mind. And then we continued along up to the muzzle end, and we're able to put our hands inside the bore and everything. And at that point, wow, we surfaced to that point, called everyone over on the boat, and just said, hey, I think we got a cannon.
Okay, we've got the barge in place. Dave and Gary are going to go down and rig the cannon. There is a little bit of incrustation that's still attached to the gun. It's going to come up with it, 200-300 pounds worth. The gun itself probably weighs 800-700 pounds, so we're talking 1,200-1,300 pounds altogether. Dave's going to go down and put the bigger strap on the breech end. He's going to bring it to Gary, and the hook's going to be attached. Dave's going to go down again with the other strap, put it on the muzzle end, bring it back up to Gary, put it on the hook. You're going to get out of the way. A little bit of tension is going to be put on. Then you're going to check to be sure it's secure. Then you're going to get back out of the way altogether on the anomaly with the buoy, and then we'll do the lift.
Building on archival research and an earlier magnetometer survey conducted in 1978, the goal of the Texas Historical Commission was to locate the resting place of the Belle, a ship belonging to the expedition of the explorer La Salle, run aground over 300 years ago. Much to everyone's surprise, on the first day of testing magnetic anomalies during the 1995 field season, preliminary findings indicate that they might have found what they're looking for.
Boy, that's a beauty, isn't it?
Look at the decoration. We've got a band of leaf decoration around here. There's a band of lettering that's mostly obscured here, and other decoration here. The lifting handles are actually in the shape of dolphins, cast in the shape of dolphins. There's a lot of decoration on the breech, and this is going to have information on it that will probably identify the year the gun was made and where it was made. And this is just the style of gun that we would expect to have on La Salle's personal ship.
The conservation of the cannon will strip away the incrustations that obscure the markings and ornamentation. Study of these exposed features reveals the weapon's history and origins. The ornamentation shows the cannon is French. The insignia of Louis XIV indicates that it was made during his reign. Le Comte de Vermandois, the illegitimate son of Louis XIV, served as admiral of the French Navy from age 2 to 14. The presence of his crest on the cannon establishes that it was made during this 12-year period. Numerical markings referenced in historical documents establish that it was cast in 1679 by Jean Latache in Rochefort. The only French expedition carrying bronze cannons to the Gulf of Mexico belonged to one French explorer, Robert Cavelier, Sieur de La Salle. La Salle was born in 1643 in Rouen in northern France, the son of Jean Cavelier, a wealthy merchant. At 23, after leaving the Jesuit order, LaSalle sailed to Canada. There he earned his reputation first as fur trader and then as explorer, laying claim for France to the Mississippi and all lands drained by the river. Building on this success, LaSalle returned to France to get the backing of King Louis XIV for an expedition to establish a French colony at the mouth of the Mississippi.
LaSalle's first voyage was a voyage of discovery and exploration. He had a team of well-trained, tough men on that trip. The second voyage was a voyage of settlement, and he had a town full of people who were not particularly trained or tough, and they had to have food and shelter and protection.
LaSalle embarked on his second expedition on July 24, 1684, from La Rochelle on the west coast of France. He had 4 ships, the Jolie, a man-of-war, the Aimable, a merchant vessel, the Saint-François, loaded with provisions, and the Belle, a bark long, built in a dry dock and outfitted especially for this expedition in Rochefort at the Corderie Royale.
The Belle was a small ship with shallow draft, and LaSalle intended to use it for exploring all of the channels and bays and inlets that he knew existed at the mouth of the Mississippi.
As LaSalle made his way to the New World, a series of tragic events and chronic illnesses plagued the expedition. The Saint-François was taken by pirates. Misled by the faulty maps of the period, LaSalle anchored in Matagorda Bay in January 1685, certain that he was near the mouth of the Mississippi. However, the Mississippi River was actually over 300 miles to the east of where LaSalle landed. Initially friendly, the Karankawa Indians began attacking LaSalle's men. Compounding the problems of the colony, the Aimable's captain disobeyed LaSalle's orders, and as a result, the Aimable ran aground and sank. Fearing insurrection, LaSalle dispatched the Jolie, along with anyone who challenged his command, back to France. By July 1685, almost half of the colony was dead. Undaunted, LaSalle ordered the construction of Fort St. Louis, 30 miles inland on a high bluff. Twice, LaSalle journeyed overland to find the Mississippi, but each time he failed. During his second attempt, the Belle was blown across Matagorda Bay in a storm until it wrecked against a sandbar near a barrier peninsula. Although the Belle sank slowly, efforts to unload cargo were unsuccessful. When LaSalle returned to find the Belle and its cargo destroyed, he knew that he had to leave Fort St. Louis to seek help from the French colonies in the north. In January 1687, as he made his way through the wilderness, LaSalle was assassinated by his own men. Instead of establishing a French stronghold, the expedition, the most costly in history to that date, resulted in 3 lost ships and 170 deaths. In April 1687, Spanish explorers located the Belle and recorded its approximate location in Matagorda Bay. These records verify that the 1995 discovery by the Texas Historical Commission is in fact the Belle. Over the course of the next 10 months, the Historical Commission divers investigate and measure the site of the Belle shipwreck. As boundaries of the shipwreck are found, buoys are deployed to mark them. Working in poor visibility conditions, the divers feel around in the sediment, making mental notes and gathering loose artifacts to give to the nautical archaeologists when they surface.
After having no luck on this east side, I went back to the west side and started at that original datum. And proceeded the same way that Bob basically had, followed his tape measure. And tried to get as far underneath as I could. To keep following it along.
Is it curving off at this radical angle?
It is curving off at that radical angle. I think it is because that's where the hull is approaching the stern post.
Yep, I agree.
And I think where Bob put that screw eye, he's got 2 in that line.
Yeah.
The second one is, I think, probably within a foot of where the stern post and the keel join. Well, I tried to dig deep down. Right where that screw eye is. So there's probably about 3 feet of the stern post there.
Excellent. Gosh, we couldn't ask for better than that. I'm just hot dog. All right, Guy. Well, you were in the water for a while. Let's get you out.
Toasty warm.
The divers have revealed that a surprising amount of the ship is still intact. An important decision remains to be made. Is the Belle to be excavated by divers, or is there another, less traditional option?
The decision to build a cofferdam occurred for two reasons. First of all, the Matagorda Bay area where the ship came to rest is fairly shallow, but the water is very, very muddy, and the visibility down there is virtually zero. And so we realized to do a very, detailed, careful excavation, it'd be very difficult in those kinds of waters. The second reason we made a decision to build the cofferdam was due to the historical significance of this particular ship. It is the oldest French shipwreck in the New World, in this hemisphere, but more importantly, it belonged to a very famous French explorer, La Salle, and because of that historical significance, we felt like we needed to do the finest quality, most detailed excavation that we could do, and a dry land excavation inside a cofferdam was clearly the way to go.
A cofferdam is a 360-degree retaining wall built around an enclosed area. Often used in bridge construction, a cofferdam consists of two concentric walls made from interlocking steel pilings. The space between the inner and outer wall is filled with sand, allowing the interior water to be removed. Located 14 miles from the base camp on the Texas coast in 12 feet of water, the Belle cofferdam requires two separate 110-foot by 30-foot barges be loaded with the necessary equipment for construction, one with sheets of steel and the other with a tool shed and crane. Using the site map as a reference, steel I-beams are driven into the bay floor to guide the placement of the walls of the cofferdam. The wall consists of a series of 3/8" thick steel pilings, each with an interlocking male and female end. Each 60-foot piling is hoisted above the cofferdam structure, carefully threaded together with its adjacent piling, then lowered down to the bay floor. As the pilings are set in place, they are inspected and leveled. Then holes for the support beams are cut. A large piece of machinery called a vibratory pile driver attaches to each piling and vibrates it through the sediment 41 feet into the sand. When finished, the outer wall of the cofferdam extends 5 feet above the surface of the water. Using underwater arc welding gear, a commercial diver punches holes in the pilings, to which tieback rods are bolted as structural supports between the inner and outer walls. The 164 tieback rods will prevent the walls from separating. 4 barges are needed to fill the 32-foot, 7-inch space between the outer and inner walls with sand, one clam bucket at a time. 11,000 tons of sand provide the support against the tremendous pressures of the bay waters. After 3 months and $1.5 million, the cofferdam is finally completed. Diesel-powered pumps begin the task of removing the 385,000 gallons of water from inside the cofferdam. The outer wall dimensions of the cofferdam are 148 feet by 118 feet, with an interior opening of 82 feet by 52 feet. 36 hours after the pumps were started, the bay floor has become almost accessible. 14 miles from the base camp off the Texas coast is now a window in the water, a gap in the waves that leads 312 years into the past. The next morning, the crew begins loading the tools needed for excavation. Every object too heavy to carry up or down the scaffold stairs must be raised and lowered by crane. All equipment must be planned in advance, as the base camp is more than an hour away by boat.
A project like this, you give it your best shot. I mean, we were doing something that really hasn't been done much before anywhere, and so we kind of, figured out what we needed the best we could, and then as time went on in this particular project, we did a lot of improvising, and so oftentimes we have to work with the supplier to see if we couldn't get the stuff sent to us as quickly as we possibly could, because we needed things right then, or else it could actually hold up the excavation progress.
The floor of the cofferdam slopes upward. The mud outside the perimeter of the shipwreck needs to be leveled before the excavation can begin.
All the sediments that we excavated, all the mud, all the silt, we actually hauled up in buckets above the cofferdam and had a screening set up on the wall of the cofferdam. And the purpose of that was to get the little small artifacts that existed in those sediments and to recover them. And in so doing, we found a number of very important things. We found artifacts such as glass beads, little pins, brass rings, but we also found a number of other things such as the bones of rats and mice and the remains of insects such as cockroach egg cases. And all those are telling us a great deal about the sanitary conditions on that ship.
The screening process involves the use of 4 screen boxes, ranging in size from 1/4 to 1/32 inch mesh. After the screening has been completed, each screen is cleaned by dumping the waste back into the bay.
We have seen over time in archaeology that the kinds of things that are considered to be significant and important has changed as different views in archaeology has changed, as we've been able to get more information out of different kinds of artifacts. Small artifacts today are things that we collect very, very carefully, glass beads and little pins and things of that nature. In the past, those probably would have been overlooked.
The electronic data system is fixed to a platform at the top of the cofferdam, where it shoots a laser beam at a prism mounted on a stadia rod. The prism then reflects the laser back to the system. From the tilt and rotation of the head and the length of time it takes for the beam to come back, the operator is able to determine the X, Y, and Z coordinates of any location within the cofferdam. The wet sediment inside the cofferdam floor is so soft that walking and standing on the shipwreck site might damage the artifacts near the surface. To facilitate the excavation of objects within the ship area, 32-foot aluminum scaffolding, called pickboards, are laid across the site. The draining of the cofferdam has left some encrusted artifacts exposed. Misting hoses keep these artifacts moist until the pickboards are set in place. Archaeologist Tony Carroll recovers the first artifacts and begins planning the first phase of the excavation.
We've got a couple of jobs that we need to do here. First of all, I want to collect this rope because it's really fragile and I think it's suffering as a result of just its immediate exposure. That area there, we need to map it in first, and so if you can hold the stadia rod right where those two pieces cross, I think that'll give us a close enough convenience.
Over here?
Yeah, that's perfect. That'll be good.
Despite the precision of the cofferdam construction, there is still some residual seepage through the sand into the excavation pit. 4 electric sump pumps are used continuously to keep the site as water-free as possible.
This project, because of the complexity of it, the fact that we basically have what is normally a marine archaeological site, an underwater archaeological site, that we made a dry land excavation because of the cofferdam, created a numerous complexities and problems that had to be dealt with. And those problems resulted in our having to look at techniques that we borrowed from land archaeology, techniques we borrowed from underwater archaeology, and many new techniques and methodologies that we simply had to develop as the project went along, as circumstances came up, as problems arose, to make it all happen and work out.
As the first few inches of sediment are cleaned away, the edges of the Belle's hull start to become apparent. The top layer of artifacts are spillage from the deck of the ship. A cannon carriage and an encrusted swivel gun that would have been located on the deck of the Belle are carefully removed and lifted onto the historical commission boat. The cannon and the swivel gun were important defensive weapons on the deck of the Belle. At the time of the expedition, Spain and France were at war, and pirates roamed the high seas. Although accompanied by a man of war, the bark Long was designed to explore shallow tributaries, where it would be separated from the rest of the expedition, and as such, required its own arsenal.
One of the wonderful surprises of the Salle Shipwreck project was once we began the excavation process, we began to see that there was really a remarkable level or state of preservation of materials. Many of the organic items, such as wood, leather, rope that existed on that ship originally, we found were actually preserved in the bottom of the ship. And that's really due to the fact that the ship ran aground in 1686 and a storm drove the hull deeply down into the mud, and when that mud settled in around the bottom portion of the hull, it created an anaerobic or oxygen-free environment that stopped the decay and deterioration of many of the more fragile items, and that's what created the really remarkable and wonderful preservation we have. One of the things we found that I personally found most remarkable was the quantity of rope. Rope typically doesn't preserve well in the warm Gulf waters. It just simply deteriorates away. On this shipwreck, we found actually several thousand feet of rope. In some cases, we found complete coils of rope still coiled up the way it was probably loaded in the ship over 300 years ago in France. The rope had never been used, and yet it was in great shape today.
A recognizable artifact intriguing to the archaeologist is a shoe last, so fully preserved that it appears brand new. The shoe last is a cobbler's tool for making and repairing shoes. The carvings on the shoe last were likely put there by its owner, but their meaning remains uncertain.
We knew from a journal account and from some other documents that several people had died on board La Belle when it was anchored in Matagorda Bay in February 1686. So we knew there was a possibility of human remains being found. We didn't know if we would find any or what condition they would be in. And in fact, we did find one completely intact human skeleton that was in a great state of preservation. Most notably, inside the cranium, there was probably about 2/3 to 3/4 of the brain tissue still preserved inside the cranium of this individual. So the human remains we found were quite unique in terms of the preservation condition that they existed in. I think that skeleton actually brought to life and made more personal the excavation of this particular ship. When you see an artifact, you think about the artifact and where it was made. When you find a person, you start imagining if you were that person, what kinds of feelings and thoughts went through that individual's mind just before they died on board La Belle, here in the New World with hostile Indians on shore and all the difficulties that La Salle and his men were encountering. Those are the kinds of thoughts that I think the public really began to think about once they saw that we had the remains of a person on board this ship.
We brought the skull that was recovered from the La Salle shipwreck up to the Scottish Rite Hospital for Children for a CAT scan. The purpose of the CAT scan is to get the digital imaging that will be able to recreate a reconstruction of the skull From the skull, we'll be able to then take the tissue thicknesses and add clay to it and actually reconstruct the facial characteristics of this individual. This is just an example of the extent to which archaeologists go to put as much flesh on the bones that we excavate on the archaeological data.
And here we go.
Here's the preliminary image.
Perfect.
I'm amazed that this skull has been in water for over 300 years, and yet it shows up as a perfectly normal skull.
The CT scan, or computerized tomography, scans the skull in 1 millimeter slices using a standard X-ray tube. This information is then data linked to a 3D workstation where it can be analyzed.
Science tells us a lot about archaeology and history. It provides the little tidbits of information. Each one unto itself is not particularly significant. When you add them all together, it just gives you much better insight, a better appreciation, a better feeling of the time period and the individuals that you're dealing with. And so for archaeologists, we try to use every avenue of science available to us, from CAT scans to any sort of trace analysis, anything that will help us to get to know the individual better that we're working with. Some of the characteristics of this skull that we're able to determine about the individual is the fact that most likely he was hit with a right uppercut and he has a broken nose here along his left side. We also know that shortly, or sometime shortly before his death, he had received a severe blow along the right side of his skull. There's a 4-inch crack in the skull that's partly fused, but then also the upper part, 2 inches, have not fused together. Therefore, it's relatively recent, but it was in the process of healing, so it was not the cause of his death. We know he was probably in a lot of physical pain. Dentition is generally poor among almost everybody during the 17th century. This person had a very, very bad abscess tooth in the first molar. In fact, the infection is so severe in the root that it's actually eaten through the bone in the maxillary process here. Probably he was in a lot of physical pain and chewing in these back molars, and therefore you have a rather distinctive wear pattern on the front teeth where he was chewing primarily on the front teeth. In fact, he's chewing primarily on the right side of his front teeth.
When we look at the skeleton, there are about 5 categories of information we can provide about the individual. When you look at the sciatic knot area of the pelvis, it's particularly constricted in males like this is, and like this individual is known sex. So we can tell this pelvis was from a male individual. The pubic symphysis portion of the pelvis is particularly correlated with age changes in the individual. And so by examination of the pubic symphysis, we can get a rough approximation of the age of the individual within 5 to 10 years. Our estimate is that the individual is from the mid-30s to the mid-40s. He was a stout individual. His general health was reasonably good. Even though he was only about 5'4", he has quite robust legs and arms.
The results of the CT scan slices, when joined, create a full data set of the skull. This precision data can be used to create an exact physical replica of the original skull.
Once a CT scan is performed on the skull, the CT slices will be read into our software system called Materialize software. This software processes the CT images into a 3-dimensional file that is then sent by network to a stereolithography machine.
The stereolithography machine consists of an ultraviolet laser. Now, the laser traces along the surface of a light-sensitive resin 1 layer at a time, each layer being 1/6000th of an inch in thickness. And each layer is added to the next until finally the model is generated in a complete piece.
Every detail of the resin skull matches the original skull recovered from the Belle, including its muscle attachment scars and bone thickness, both of which are essential to an accurate facial reconstruction by a forensic anthropologist.
There's a significant amount of brain material still preserved within the cranium of the skull, so we're going to attempt to move it by using the specific gravity of the solution. The brain at the moment is saturated with a mixture of water and alcohol, and we're just going to put it into a new container and add a solution that has a lot more water in it, which is a heavier specific gravity, and that will cause the brain matter to simply float to the surface or to the opening of the foramen magnum.
The brain material will undergo DNA analysis. These findings can then be compared to the DNA traits of descendants of the LaSalle expedition, confirming the identity of the human remains.
Oh, that actually you can see the folds right here in this piece right there. That pretty much washed out everything. Here we can just let this settle. All the brain material will float to the top, and all the silt sink to the bottom, and then we can just skim all this off.
Using a combination of comparative data and scientific speculation, the original skull evolves first to a resin replica, which then becomes the base on which the clay model is built. In the excavation, each archaeologist is assigned to a specific area. The sword hilt and muskets contained in this crate took archaeologist Greg Cook 3 days to excavate.
Well, this is one of the muskets that we found. So far we have 2 crates of muskets. It's a very exciting find for us because we didn't really expect it. Here you can see the crate that I'm leaning on here is mainly concreted, is not very well preserved, although there's still quite a bit of information we can discover about these muskets. And then as you look up just a few centimeters deeper in the hull, you have these that are really in pristine condition. The wood is all preserved, the preservation is incredible. You see the ramrods are still intact. This is a treasure trove for us, really, in terms of information about 17th century weaponry. Even though the barrel is no longer here, you can see where it would have sat on the stock. This is the remains of the wooden stock. You have the butt coming down here, and even though the remains of the stock are not preserved, it would have been held in this fashion. The hammer assembly would have been on this side. It would have held a flint, of course. These are called flintlocks. And when you squeeze the trigger, it would have dropped the flint, caused a spark, and then if your powder wasn't too wet, it would have hopefully discharged. State-of-the-art weapons for their time, really.
The lead munitions aboard the Belle have survived almost unaffected. Seawater has little effect on non-ferrous metal artifacts. The muskets, like many of the iron artifacts on the ship, rusted away in salt water. However, the incrustation forms a natural mold around the object. By X-raying the incrustation, the form of the original iron object can be identified. To recreate this object, the incrustation is broken open and epoxy resin is poured into its cavities to produce a casting. After the epoxy hardens, the incrustation is broken off, and rusted sediment particles are then rubbed and spray fixed onto the surface of the resin object to give the appearance of the original artifact. Epoxy molding reveals a remarkable amount of artifact detail, including hammer and construction marks, and even stamps from the original maker. This process enables us to study artifacts that were destroyed hundreds of years ago. As the excavation reaches the cargo hold of the ship, the artifacts become more complex. Wooden crates filled with trade goods are found near each other. One of the crates is so close to its original state that it's decided to jacket it in burlap and plaster and to excavate it as a single artifact.
When we found this in the field, we partially excavated it, began to see what we had, saw how complex it was, and decided at that point it would be easier to bring it back intact to the laboratory here where we have more time to excavate it more carefully. It appears that the plaster jacketing that we had has largely disintegrated in the water, and I'm going to be curious to see what the condition is of the actual artifacts inside of the box and the condition of the box itself.
I think what we do is we cut the burlap down either side, fold the burlap onto the top, and see if we can lift this plywood off in one piece.
And so we want to cut the burlap as low as possible. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Back here, so you don't even have to cut it.
So really, you can see that the burlap was not the best choice because it's rotted.
Right. All this black is caused by sulfides creating an anaerobic environment.
We're going to be able to remove that, but it just creates another step we have to go
Aesthetically
through.
not too. Okay, here, can you pick up this? Have you got all
I'm just
your...
going to see if I've got everything loose here, Donnie. Ready there, Donnie?
Okay. Here's a
Okay.
extra layer put in here for protection,
Yeah.
so we need to
Remove this carefully.
Let me
make
hold
sure
the
it
rings.
doesn't pull up anything with it.
We're not taking any rings out. There's a couple more combs in the middle there.
Looked like they were, in the field, looked like they may have been mirrors.
Right here, you can see glass.
And you can see there's a large mass of
Brass
brass pins right in here.
Over the past few months, we've been conserving all the isolated rings. Each time we conserve them, we compare them to the different varieties or different designs we found. And thus far, we've identified 14 different patterns on the rings. They usually have some sort of religious significance. We find some that look like they have Christ on them, then 3 X's, and then IHS and Hoc Sigma, and then you find Loyola and various saints. So they all have religious connotations of one form or the other.
To find an intact box of 17th century trade goods is unprecedented. Trade goods of this nature were extremely valuable to LaSalle. A single ring was reported to bring an animal hide in trade.
When we first started doing excavation, we realized that there were at least 3, possibly 4 colanders that were in here. So this find is a very significant find. It's not only important as far as what the contents are, but it's also important because this represents the personal possessions of a specific man on board the ship. These features were all within the confines of this one small box here. We had found not only these kettles, but a very nice colander, which has the 6-petaled floral design in the middle. This is also a ladle that was found within the box. It's a very nice feature, and we found completely intact. Very little damage has been imposed upon this ladle. Some of these things that we've seen, these candlesticks, these probably would have been in officers for the officers' mess. Within this box, we also found the remains of a small lock with a latch. Inscribed on the latch is a name. This name has not been identified yet, but the possibility of this contents being the possessions of this person is very highly likely. With all hope and prospect, we may have been able to find the man's name based on the latch of the lock.
Another crate uncovered contained a grouping of small ceramic pots. Initially believed to hold pine tar pitch, investigation showed that these were instead fire pots, an important weapon. Sealed to the top of the fire pot was a wooden lid with a wick holder leading inside the pot. The fire pot would have been filled with a flammable liquid, and the wick inserted through to the liquid would burn and ignite the liquid upon impact. Inside of each fire pot was a cast iron grenade with a separate fuse. When the fire pot was thrown onto the deck of a Predator ship, the ceramic pot would shatter, spreading the flaming liquid and igniting the fuse of the grenade, which would then explode into shrapnel fragments, mortally wounding anyone attempting to put the fire out. By February 1997, a majority of the ship's cargo has been removed. Almost 40% of the hull of the ship has survived the shipwreck. The full shape of the hull is now apparent, and the last of the artifacts, the first of the cargo loaded into the Belle, is being prepared for removal. Beneath the many crates of trade goods and weapons found are varying-sized barrels.
The barrel was the basic container that was used to carry material in the ship. A barrel with its rounded sides is really a great shape for a ship's hull, which has a rounded bottom to it. And basically the content of La Belle was in various barrels of different sizes. And as we excavated the ship, we found that those barrels were very deliberately placed in the ship in a certain pattern so that they locked together, and so that the cargo inside La Belle stayed with the ship even though they might be in rough waters. And so the overall cargo hold of La Belle was very densely packed, which was important for a ship that might be out on the high seas.
At the very bottom of the ship's hold, the last of the cargo is uncovered. 2 more bronze cannons, like the first one recovered, were carried as a ballast aboard the Belle. Public interest in the Belle has grown, and the discovery of additional cannons has sparked an even greater interest. A group of visitors and the media are allowed onto the cofferdam to observe the recovery of the cannons. The 2 cannons are brought back to the conservation lab. The first cannon, obscured by incrustations, is placed in a series of desalinization baths. Removing soluble salts from saltwater artifacts is critical to their conservation. Allowing the artifact to dry without properly removing the salts allows the salts to crystallize, expanding on a molecular level and potentially destroying the artifact. After desalinization is complete, the cannon undergoes an electrolytic cleaning process. Electric contacts are attached to the cannon and it is submerged in an electrolytic solution. The flow of electricity away from the cannon provides the dual function of dislodging incrustation as well as converting oxide buildup back into metal. After any residual incrustation is carefully removed, the cannon is conserved to its original state. The screening process continues through to the end of the excavation. The soil from within the ship yields a large number of artifacts, including a pair of hawk bells for use in falconry and trade with the Indians, and lead cannonballs. An artifact of particular interest found is a brass divider, a tool used for nautical navigation.
These are very common instruments found on shipwrecks from the beginning of the 16th century onward. They're typically made of brass and steel. This one has only got its brass component. There would have been steel points out to here. A slightly newer version that includes its points looks like this. And it's all you do is use it to measure distances on a chart. These are normally found in pairs, and in fact, this is one of a matched set that were found on board La Belle. In addition to this pair, which is a very fine version, these may have actually been part of a draftsman's set. We have versions that are less sophisticated, and this particular style with the big ring head is known very commonly from the 16th century onward, very often referred to as one-handed dividers because you could open them simply by squeezing at the top. This is also missing its steel points. Very often you find many sets on board a ship. Each person who might have been responsible for navigation typically owned his own. This wreck has produced at least 5, and there may be part fragments of others.
All that remains to be excavated is the wood of the ship itself. Unattached timbers, including pieces of bulkhead, mast, and bilge pump tube, are carefully traced onto clear plastic, their original location recorded and verified, then removed up to wooden vats on top of the cofferdam. Clear plastic sheets are laid onto the hull and the planks and timbers, and their relative positions are recorded.
Well, we've excavated the contents of the ship out, and now we're looking at actually trying to bring the ship itself out. And we've had 2 alternative ways of doing that. One was to lift the ship intact in one piece, and the other was to dismantle it piece by piece. And initially, we felt like lifting it intact would be the best way to go. We felt like we might end up with the best possible museum exhibit at a later date. As our engineers looked at it, though, they felt like that the feasibility of taking it up in one piece was very, very low, and that there was a good chance we could have some sort of a catastrophic breaking of the ship as we tried to lift it. So as a result, we've decided to take it apart piece by piece in exactly the reverse order that the master shipwright built the ship. And so what we're doing now is we're actually beginning that process, taking off the planks one by one.
I can't even pick up my hands back.
We have literally hundreds of timbers now that are stored in large wooden vats that we've made to keep the timbers submerged in water and to keep them moist and keep them from drying out. Those timbers in those vats are now going to be moved up to Texas A&M University. The university will start the conservation process. It'll probably take 6 to 8 years before the timbers are ready to be taken out of the vats and displayed in a museum.
More than 1 million Belle artifacts have been brought to the Texas A&M Conservation Lab. Dozens of vats contain hundreds of pieces of the Belle's hull.
Now that we've finished the dismantling of the hull, we're actually excavating around and below where the hull was. And the purpose of that is to try and get any artifacts that may have fallen off the ship when it ran aground 311 years ago. We are finding artifacts. We have found some pewter plates. We have found some items that LaSalle would have traded to the Indians, and also some rigging, some rope and some sailcloth that fell off the mast of the ship and got buried down below the ship. But right now, this is the end of the project when we complete this excavation underneath the hull. At this point, what we're going to do is to actually take all of our equipment out of the cofferdam, take it on back to our headquarters, and then the cofferdam is going to be dismantled and the water will flood back in over the site.
I've been involved with archaeological projects for 40 years, and the excavation of the Belle was absolutely unique and one of the most extraordinary projects I've ever seen. Not only the excavation within the cofferdam, but the things recovered to find a big coil of anchor rope from that early time period, to see coils of brass wire. Archaeologists always recover data and artifacts, and there were tons of both in the Belle. These things really made that project very special and very unique to me.
As the archaeologists bring their supplies and the last batch of artifacts back to the Texas Historical Commission base camp, the excavation of the Belle draws to a close. The preservation and conservation of the nearly 1 million artifacts will take place over the next 5 years. Each artifact must be carefully examined, stabilized, logged, sorted, tagged, and prepared for conservation. The Belle artifacts represent an amazingly diverse set of materials, such as glass, leather, ceramics, bronze, brass, and even human bone. Each must undergo a unique set of conservation processes. As the conservation is completed and the artifacts organized, the conditions, expectations, and concerns of the original colonists become apparent. Through the study of these artifacts, our understanding of history is made specific. Prior generalizations about LaSalle and his expedition must be re-examined and revised. The Belle contained the necessities of life for a 17th century colonist. The tools to survive, build, trade, fight, and eat had to all be packed and brought to the New World. The hopes and opportunities of the colonists were stowed in the hull of the Belle. Despite all obstacles, they reached the New World, but were an eyeshot of land when the Belle ran aground. The colonists never had an opportunity to put these tools to work. Where the shipwreck of the Belle in itself tells the story of LaSalle's failure, the contents of the hull show us what might have been possible.
Judging from the contents of the Belle, this expedition was really geared for success. They had plenty of supplies, manpower, weapons, trade goods, all of the things they needed to establish a real French stronghold in the New World. They also had the support of the military. They had investors from private individuals to the king that wanted this endeavor to succeed. This wasn't a voyage of exploration. This was a voyage of permanent settlement to make a French stronghold in the Mississippi Valley. If LaSalle hadn't encountered all the difficulties and if he hadn't perished, I think that France would have become a major player in the New World, and a lot of North America might be speaking French to this day.